What's the best case of a rich kid getting hit by karma you've experienced? I grew up in a neighborhood where making it meant simply surviving. My mom worked double shifts at a local diner while juggling odd jobs, and she always did her best to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. We didn't have much, but we had each other. I wore my older cousin's hand-me-downs, and I'd long since gotten used to scuffed shoes and patched-up jackets. But one thing I had going for me was school. I was always a good student, smart, determined, and I guess that's what ended up getting me a scholarship to one of the most prestigious high schools in the city. It felt like a dream when I got that acceptance letter. I mean, going to the same school where all the city's future CEOs and lawyers sent their kids. It felt like I had finally gotten a foot in the door to a better life. But stepping into that school for the first time was rough, to say the least. It was a completely different world. The hallways were lined with kids wearing clothes that probably cost more than my entire apartment. They all had the latest phones, drove shiny new cars, and talked about their ski trips and summer homes like it was no big deal. Meanwhile, I was riding the bus from my neighborhood every morning and trying to make my old, worn-out shoes last as long as possible. At first, I tried to keep a low profile. I focused on my studies, kept my head down, and didn't really bother with anyone. But that didn't last long. Enter Brad Harrison. Now, Brad was the kind of guy you couldn't miss. He was the stereotypical rich kid, blonde hair, perfect smile, designer everything. And he made it his mission to make sure I knew I didn't belong. It started small, just little jabs about my clothes or the fact that I didn't have the latest phone. "Hey man, did you get that jacket at Goodwill?" he'd say, smirking, and his group of equally rich friends would snicker. I'd shrug it off, pretending it didn't bother me. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. But then it escalated. One time in gym class, I was wearing a pair of sneakers that had definitely seen better days. They were a little too tight, but it's what I had. Brad took one look at them and laughed. "Man, those shoes look like they're from last century. You know, if you need a handout, just ask. I'm sure my dad's got some spare change lying around." That was his thing, always throwing his dad's wealth in my face. I didn't bite though. I kept quiet, kept my head down, and did my best to focus on why I was there in the first place. To get a good education and make something of myself. I wasn't going to let some rich bully ruin that for me. But the truth is, life was hard. My mom was doing everything she could, but money was tight. So I picked up a part-time job. It wasn't glamorous yard work, cleaning, running errands, but it helped. And the best part, I was working for Brad's dad. Mr. Harrison was nothing like Brad. He was polite, even kind. He owned this massive estate and ran a successful business, but he never made me feel less than. If anything, he treated me with more respect than anyone at that school ever had. He'd ask me about my family, offer me food after a long day of working, and even give me extra cash sometimes, knowing I could use it. It felt weird, but in a good way. He wasn't like the rest of them. Over time, I started to notice something about the Harrison family. Mr. Harrison might have been rich and successful, but his family? They didn't seem to care about him at all. Brad, his mom, his siblings, they acted like he was just there to bankroll their lives. They'd complain about not getting a new car fast enough or not being able to go on a fancy vacation. I'd see it when I was at the house, Mr. Harrison sitting alone in his office while the rest of his family lived their luxurious lives, completely ignoring him. One day, after I'd finished mowing the lawn, Mr. Harrison asked me to sit with him for a bit. We started talking about random things, school, my plans for the future, but then he got quiet, like something was weighing on him. And then he said something that stuck with me. He told me, "You know, it's funny. You think money would make everything easier, make people happy. But all it does is make them greedy. My family, they don't care about me. They care about what I can give them." I didn't know what to say to that. What do you say to a man who's given everything to his family, only to feel like they don't love him for who he is? I just listened. I think that's all he really wanted, someone to listen. A few months after that conversation, Mr. Harrison passed away. Heart attack. It hit me hard, and not just because I lost my job. It felt like the world lost one of the good ones, you know? But things got really crazy after that. Brad came into school the day after the funeral acting like he was untouchable. He was bragging about how he was going to inherit everything, his dad's company, the mansion, the cars. He was practically strutting through the halls, like he was already the king of the world. But then, the will got read. I wasn't there, obviously, but I heard all about it. Word travels fast in rich kid circles. Mr. Harrison had left nearly everything, his money, his business, his estate, to me. I couldn't believe it when I heard, me? The poor kid from the wrong side of town. It didn't make any sense. But apparently, Mr. Harrison had made it clear in his will. He didn't want his family to have anything. Not after the way they'd treated him all those years. Brad, his siblings, his mom, they got next to nothing. I was in shock. I mean, what do you even do when something like that happens? I went from barely scraping by to inheriting more money than I knew what to do with. Brad, on the other hand, lost it. He came at me the next day, yelling in the middle of the school hallway. "You manipulated him, you tricked my dad, you don't deserve any of it." He was furious, but I could see the hurt underneath it all. He knew, deep down, why his dad had done what he did. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Brad stormed off, and that was the last I really saw of him. He dropped out of school not long after that. From what I've heard, he's still struggling, trying to figure out how to live in a world where his dad's money isn't there to save him. As for me, I used the money to help my family, paid off debts, and made sure my mom didn't have to work 2 jobs anymore. I even started a small charity in Mr. Harrison's name, to help kids from neighborhoods like mine get the education they deserve. It felt right, like the best way to honor him. Karma doesn't always come around, but when it does, it hits hard. Brad learned that the hard way. And me? Well, I guess I just got lucky.